Fanny Hurst was born October 19, 1885, and died February 23, 1968. She was born in Hamilton, Ohio, and was raised in St. Louis, Missouri. She is the only surviving child of Rose Hurst and Samuel Hurst. Although she had a sister who died at the age of 3 due to diphtheria, her name was Edna. Due to Edna's death, Hurst began to actively participate in the Jewish religion, of which she was a part of. On May 1, 1925, Opportunity magazine held their very first literary awards banquet. This is where Fanny Hurst and Zora Neale Hurston met. Langston Hughes also attended the award show and took first prize for his collection of poems. Hurston took 2 second places for her poem Spunk and her play Color Struck. Fanny is the one who presented Zora Neale Hurston with her poetry award. Zora Neale Hurston would run errands for Fanny Hurst, but there is some dispute whether Zora Neale worked as Hurst's maid or secretary or was simply her friend. Hurst was the very first female to earn pay for writing short stories. After the publication of her story, Ain't Life Wonderful, Fanny's mother worried that her daughter wouldn't be seen as an eligible bachelorette to a suitor. She then married a Russian immigrant named Jacques Danielson in May 1915. They disliked him due to the fact that they thought all Eastern European Jews to be kikes. Their marriage ended in 1952 due to the death of Danielson. Mule Bone was a topic of debate between Hurston and Hughes. They began writing Mule Bone in March 1930. After Hurston went away for the summer, she said she would return in the fall. After she returned, she decided not to continue writing the play with Hughes, seeing as she felt as though he wanted to collaborate with someone else, for which she did not agree. Hughes eventually severed ties with Rufus Osgood Mason. Due to this, Hurston shunned Hughes to protect her relationship with Mason. Hurston then submitted for Mule Bone to be published and listed herself as the sole author. After Hughes found a copy that bore her name alone, he submitted a copy with both of their names. Langston Hughes was born February 1, 1902, in Joplin, Missouri. He died May 22, 1967, in New York, New York. His parents were separated when he was born, and he was raised by his mother and grandmother. After the death of his grandmother, he and his mother migrated to Cleveland. After graduating high school, he wrote The Negro Speaks of Rivers, which brought him attention after it was published in The Crisis being a national magazine for people of color. When attending a Columbian University, he explored Harlem and grew an attachment to the city. He was discovered by Nicholas Vichel Lindsay.
Countee Cullen was born May 30, 1903 in New York City. Cullen attended DeWitt Clinton High School but began writing poetry at the age of 14. He later entered New York University in 1922 and graduated in 1923. He was admitted into Harvard University to get his master's degree after publishing Color in 1923. In 1927, Copper's Son met with controversy in the African American community because Cullen did not focus on the subject of race as he did in Color. In fact, Cullen was raised in a white community, unlike Langston Hughes, therefore he lacked personal experience on discrimination. That didn't stop Cullen from being a huge part in the Harlem Renaissance.
Claude McKay was born on September 15, 1889 in Sunnyvale, Jamaica. At a young age, McKay was sent to live with his oldest brother, who was a teacher. His parents wanted him to receive the best education available at the time. By the age of 17, McKay began getting mentored by Walter Jekyll, an English gentleman. Jekyll encouraged McKay to write poetry, and 5 years later, in 1912, when he immigrated to the United States, he had already published 2 dialect verses. Now that he was in America, McKay enrolled in school to study agronomy. Here is where he experienced American racism for the first time. In 1917, he was finally able to publish 2 poems, and 2 years later, during a time known as the Red Summer of 1919, McKay was inspired to write one of his best-known poems, If We Must Die. Winston Churchill later called the poem an anthem of resistance during World War II. Other well-known books and poems that addressed racism written by Claude McKay were Baptism, The White House, and The Lynching. McKay was identified as a leading inspirational force during the Harlem Renaissance by Langston Hughes and Count Cullen.
Charlotte Mason was born May 18, 1854 in Princeton, New Jersey. Although she was already born into wealth, it increased after the death of her husband, Rufus Mason. After his death, Charlotte sought the spirituality that she connected with people of an early age in the evolutionary or historical development. She traveled through America heading southwest and lived with Plain Indians for a period of time. Around 1927, Charlotte heard a lecture by philosopher Alain Locke. This caused her to turn her attention to what African Americans were going through. Locke was her confidant and talent scout. She later made a center for leading black artists, writers, and musicians, Claude McKay included. She took interest in Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston. Mason meddled in Hughes' life, dissuading him from visiting certain places and people. She also made Hurston sign a contract that wouldn't allow her to publish without permission. Both writers were against this, and by 1932, Mason banished them from her fold. She later lost interest in the Harlem Renaissance.
Richard Wright was born September 4th, 1908, in Natchez, Mississippi, and died November 28th, 1960, in Paris, France. He moved to Chicago at 19 to become a writer. Wright joined the John Reed Club, which had ties to the Communist Party. His written work would often show up in communist papers. Native Son was an honest yet graphic novel of urban lifestyle. However, instead of critics focusing on the main point of the novel, they were more interested in the fact that Wright believed that communism was a better system of economics.
Ezra Pound was born in Haley, Idaho on October 30th, 1885. By the age of 15, Pound already knew he wanted to become a poet, and after finishing college and teaching for about a year, Pound decided to head to Europe to pursue his writing. A mere year later, he already had 3 books published, and the next 3 decades of his life were filled with more moving around in Europe and publishing books and poems. During this time, Pound began his most famous work, the Cantos, which took him many years of his life to finish. When Pound finally settled down in Italy, he began supporting the Italian dictator Mussolini and was arrested for treason, so they sent him back to the United States. During the trial, Pound was declared insane and sent to live in St. Elizabeth's Hospital, where he continued to write for the remainder of his life.